Hello, greetings from London W10. This is Stephen Coates. I left the dusty office of the Bureau of Lost Culture to come for a wander around these few streets that are squeezed into a corner of the city, edged by two elevated freeways north of Notting Hill. Now, back in the day, I used to live here in a concrete tower on the 19th floor looking east over the city. It was amazing. You can see the Westway winding its way out of London beneath you. Just opposite is Grenfell Tower. That name's probably familiar to many people in the UK. The site of a devastating fire in 2017 that killed 72 residents. Well, the street I'm walking down now is Frestonia Road. It's a classic London mix. Social housing, some older, more elegant houses. We are next to what is now a very expensive part of town. Some industrial units and a rather fine old Victorian red brick grand building called the People's Hall. It's quite quiet today. There's just a couple of kids. There's a man pushing a pram and some workmen over there. I mean, you never think that 45 years ago, this was the epicenter of a hotbed of countercultural activism, protest and artistic endeavor. In this episode, we're returning to a subject with which we began the series, the micronation, the countercultural country. Back in 2019, we started with a program on Sealand, the smallest country in the world, a tiny state that hovers on a platform in the North Sea off the east coast of the UK. Well, now we're going to go back in time in search of the People's Republic of Frestonia, a micronation that declared itself independent of the UK and existed for almost a decade in these streets during the deep countercultural years of the 70s and 80s. And I'm going to head back now to the Bureau to meet one of the people who formed it, who lived and loved in it. A very countercultural life indeed. See you in a bit. Okay, I'm back. Now, first of all, before we start, I'd like to thank Judy, Rob, Peter, Johnny, Rich and Suki, who all contributed to our wild endeavours this month. Thank you so much. We very much appreciate the support. You can join them if you like, or just sign up for our bulletins at bureauoflostculture.com. Be part of our countercultural community. Right, let's set out in search of the People's Republic of Frestonia. Our guide is a former resident and one of its founders. Along the way, we're also going to dig into her countercultural life, communes in West Berlin and Scotland, gypsy caravans in Wales, home births and hash cookies in a cowshed, and her life with her husband, the social activist Nicholas Albery. And we're going to find out about their amazing work in revolutionising approaches to dying, breaking the taboos that surround death in Western society, bringing counterculture to the undertaking and funeral business through the Natural Death Centre. She's a practicing psychotherapist and for over 20 years has run death education workshops, discussion groups, courses, talks, hosted death cafes in her home in northwest London. She even received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Death Oscars in London. She is Josefine Speyer. Hello, Josephine.
Hello.
Welcome to the Bureau of Lost Culture. We did meet last time, I think, in Kensal Green Cemetery, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you brought your friend, Erlander Haraldsson, who the Icelandic psychologist and psychic researcher, right?
Yeah, he's a leading force, really, in that field of reincarnation, but also in after-death communications.
Mm. He's now dead, though, isn't he?
Has he died?
Oh, he's dead, yeah.
Oh, God. He's been out of touch with me.
Even from beyond the grave?
Yes, he has been out of touch with me. He stayed at my house several times when he came to lecture in London.
Well, I remember because he was staying with you when he came to talk at Kensal Green Cemetery. Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to come back to the subject of death. We may possibly get onto the subject of life after death if we've got enough time. But I want to talk about life before death, and specifically about your countercultural life before death. And we're going to talk about Frestonia, the micronation that existed briefly in West London. But before that, you know, you're not from London, are you?
No, I'm German.
Because you were deep in the sort of countercultural years and times, weren't we? So how did that come about?
Well, I was a dropout, I think, from the word go. I was the second of 7 children, grew up near Stuttgart in Germany. My teachers persuaded my father, who was very strict, that I should be allowed to study art. And he said, okay, you can do that if you become an arts teacher. But luckily, I did the foundation course at the art school. And then after getting portfolio together there, went to do the exam for becoming an arts teacher. So I had long hair. I wore my brother's underwear as T-shirts because he didn't have T-shirts at the time, and jeans. And they looked at me and thought...
Hold on a second, you wore your brother's underwear as a T-shirt?
No, yeah, well, they're
vest, I see, I got it. I just couldn't quite get my head around there. You'd fit into a
We'll have to edit this out, won't we?
No, I'm definitely going to include that. That's German countercultural fashion in the late 1960s.
Yeah, corduroy jeans. You know, Eldridge Cleaver, Angela Davis, these are my heroes. And John Berger, who was a very great guy who wrote about art and social change. But from Stuttgart, being luckily refused to become an art teacher, I went to Berlin. And Berlin, Bader Meinhof was going on, Rudi Dutschke, the student revolution. It was tough, and it became increasingly scary with machine guns, police with machine guns in the street.
I think it would be wonderful, actually, to make a show about Berlin and Germany, actually, in the late 60s and 70s. But, I mean, I suppose... that time, it's deep in the Cold War, isn't it? So Berlin is this little island, marooned, as it were,
connected by one
cultural island, connected by a highway to what was then West Germany.
Yeah.
Right. So quite intense times.
It was, but it also was the place where everything was happening.
Right.
You didn't want to be in West Germany at the time, Communes. We had these beautiful old flats, apartments in these big, beautiful old houses, and you could rent them cheaply, and people could roller skate down the hallway. It was so big. And
right, so if you wanted to, as it were, to borrow that American phrase, tune in, turn on, drop out, in West Germany, you could do that by heading down the highway to West Berlin.
Yeah. Live in a commune, smoke dope. I smoked dope in West Germany, and I took some LSD and had some amazing experiences. But it was always a sacrament. It wasn't, and weed was nice for dance. So the arts would change society.
Right.
That was my belief at the time.
It does, though, doesn't it?
I suppose it is a very important part of it, but not the visual arts. But perhaps not the visual arts. The music, perhaps more so. Go straight to the unconscious, or film. But in West Berlin at the time, you could watch East German television, and I watched a film about Mongolia, and I love horses. And at the time, all the hippies went to India, or Afghanistan, and I wanted to go to Mongolia, but I was scared to go there on my own. So this sounds silly, but Scotland, the Highlands of Scotland, was my European version of Mongolia. So,
I spend half my time in the Highlands of Scotland.
Oh, wow. I love that.
I'd never connected it with Mongolia. There is something like rather magical and slightly otherworldly about it. Maybe that's it.
It's you can, in the Highlands of Scotland, you can walk on a piece of ground that nobody has walked on for years and years and years, or ever. And that is magical. The energy is amazing. And, I was hitchhiking, first of all, to London from Berlin. I was hitchhiking all the way. I was hitchhiking everywhere.
What year was this?
1970. No, 71.
So you were arriving in London. I mean, obviously, as you said, the Berlin life was pretty hippie anyway, but what was it like coming to London in 71?
The food was terrible. You could not eat anything. I could not believe this. Frank Zappa said the poor people of England, they have to eat whatever this crap food. It was not true. I was brought up on, at the time I drank a lot of cappuccino, espresso, and I even smoked cigarettes at the time sometimes. And that you can, but I always ate very healthily. So that was a bit of a shock. But the people I met was amazing. So I stayed in a house in Hammersmith with some South African young people who shared a house. And then I hitchhiked up to Scotland, and I stayed in Drumnadrochit, working with a girl who looked after horses. and living in a caravan and riding every day. That was my idea of
your
bliss.
dream come true, right?
Yeah. And so then the girls thought, are you hippie? Because of the way I dressed. There are hippies here. And I went to this, she said, this farm, grow take nearby. So I hitchhiked there, and they were hippies from London, and they came from everywhere, but mostly London, and some Americans. And they squatted this farm. And I went to live there. I went to stay there. And
were you taking care of the farm? I mean, were you actually...
Yeah, we were working on the farm, growing vegetables and stuff.
It's interesting because that's come up a couple of times, that it was sort of 60s here and in America too. And then a lot of people quite exhausted by their experiences, maybe too many late nights, too many drugs, as Miles said. And really the early 70s was when people started to retreat more from the cities to the country to do this
back to the land,
right? And organic farming and all that stuff started up, right?
Yeah. It was very deeply wanting to have a healthier lifestyle and not to be the whole capitalistic idea of cars and waste, and it just always felt horrendous. So that was a shared philosophy.
Did you, and in terms of how you all got on, I'm always fascinated by this because I'm a bit sort of OCD. I can't imagine living in a commune, sharing with people. But did you all sort of, I mean, was it harmonious, or was there sort of psychological disruptions and earthquakes going on?
I mean, it's different if I'm a guest in Grotake and I observe the squabbles they have and stuff. And the poet Neil Oram was sort of the rule of the roost a little bit. And they all had a spiritual sort of search. They did a lot of... Everyone there had a spiritual outlook. And I didn't really get involved with the struggles that people had. But they were very, very generous, and there was no mental illness, and that is, above all, that's important. Sure. How you deal with conflict.
So your visa ran out, so you had to leave.
Yeah, and then Pete said he wanted to, buy me a train ticket to London, and I should stay at Nicholas Saunders's house, who's a friend, and rather than hitchhiking. So then he took me to Inverness to the train station and let the train go out because he couldn't really bear to part. Then he said, okay, I'm going to take you all the way to London. Introduced me to his mum in Chelsea. And because he's come, he used to have, as a child, he had tea with Prince Charles.
Right, posh hippies then.
Yeah, posh hippies. Posh, artistic, creative dropouts, I would say. And I met Nicholas Saunders, who lived in this amazing place in Edith Grove in Chelsea. And he had a living room that was an igloo made of paper mache. Daily life would be happening in this igloo. Everybody,
That sounds very 70s.
Yes. And his bedroom was an egg. Even at Neil's yard, he had a bedroom. He had an egg hanging above the kitchen. Right.
Well, just for anybody who doesn't know, Neil's yard, just around the corner from here in Covent Garden, which is like a little courtyard, and still little bits, traces of counterculture there, aren't there? With the remedy shop, and there was Neil's yard's cheeses, of course. I don't know if that's still there.
Yeah.
It's gone a bit upmarket since, but he set that up, didn't he? But we'll come back to that.
Yeah,
for
he
sure.
did. Yeah.
So that was your intro to London proper.
Yeah, I stayed there, hung out. He was good fun. And met my husband later, Nicholas Albery, who was a very close friend of Nicholas Saunders. And we went to, this is what Nicholas Saunders told me, he had to go to a meeting. Would I like to come? And the meeting was called a CLAP meeting. Well, CLAP means gonorrhea or whatever.
Sexual transmitted disease,
sexual
of some sort, yeah.
And it is one of those projects Nicholas set up called Community Levy for Alternative Project. And what he did was he lived in Holland Park, and he went round to businesses in Holland Park and Portobello Road and asked them for money so that people could write in and ask for money for a project they were running. And it always had to be a sort of alternative project of some kind that benefited society or something.
We're going to talk more, obviously, about Nicholas Albery, your husband, because he's a very interesting character. And, a kind of important activist, I think, in 70s counterculture, who's
Absolutely.
been a little bit forgotten, I think, in a sense, not by you, but I mean, obviously by the sort of histories and stuff, because he was very active with a lot of the important things that were happening. Frestonia we're going to talk about, but BIT, you know, the information exchange and stuff
That's
like that.
what he did at the time. He was running BIT, Help Information Center.
Right, tell us about BIT.
Well, BIT was the most chaotic place you could imagine. It was a squatted house, or maybe, I don't know how, they got it for almost no money. It was at the corner of Westbourne Park and Great Western Road in Notting Hill. All the area has now been redeveloped, but they were all old Victorian houses. And there was a lot of poverty. And, I mean, just to say about BIT was set up by another friend, John Hopkins, who was a good friend, who also has died now. And it was a help information center for people who needed help, whatever, housing, health, whatever, going to India, people had arrived, hippies had arrived from traveling abroad, and they brought information about where they went, or they even sent letters about their experiences, and Nicholas compiled this into a book.
It was like a photocopied kind of newslettery thing, wasn't it?
Gestetner was the thing. There was no photocopy at the time. He had to do,
Gestetner printer. And it was kind of, it's interesting, it's come up a couple of times here, because obviously Hoppy had set up International Times, which is based in the same area, isn't it? And it kind of seems to, it's almost like a kind of cross between the Rough Guide and I guess a sort of, you know, paper version of Facebook or something in some way, wasn't it? It was a kind of social media for,
you could go there.
For counterculture,
You could go there and just hang out and meet people, and then find somebody to spend the night with, or to take drugs with, or to make friends, or to travel with, or give you some advice. And the office was always, there was always somebody in the office who was working for BIT. They're all volunteers who had a lot of information and provided the information. It's like a switchboard.
I like to hear about this stuff because the sort of idealism and dreaminess of the 60s. Things got darker, obviously, because of various things that happened in America and here, and the social circumstances of Britain at the time in the 70s. You know, the economy was in ruins and stuff, but at the same time it had this kind of seasoning effect, didn't it, on the idealism. So people like you and Nicholas and Heathcote Williams, and they became activists more and actually started to do stuff rather than dreaming about stuff. So that impetus to sort of change the world, you know, we can change the world, got a bit more concrete right at that time.
Nicholas went to Windsor. There was a big festival and the police came in and dragged him by the hair, and the photographs of that. Yeah, there was a court case then later with Diana Senior, Heathcote Williams' partner, and Nicholas against the police, and they won. But in the meantime, I was up in Scotland, very, very disappointed that Nicholas didn't come.
Because you were romantically engaged at this time,
we were immediately. So I was back at the commune, and there were a lot of changes, but he had a girlfriend. He had a girlfriend when I came back to London.
That you didn't know about?
No.
It's funny because with the last episode, which was Women, Sex and Counterculture, and we was talking with Jill Drower and Jenny Spires, and Jill was saying that, you know, one of the unspoken rules of engagement at the time, as it were, was that you weren't supposed to mind if your partner had somebody else.
Free love.
It was
and all
uncool to actually be bothered about it.
Yeah, no possessions.
No possessions, right. So you came back to find him otherwise engaged, as it were.
Yeah. And we did some Albion Free State television program for the election, where he wore a Father Christmas beard and an Indian gown and had long hair and
Albion Free State was a political party, was it? He was standing for Albion Free State, and Heathcote Williams, his friend, had written the post. Heathcote had provided the words, and he had written them on sort of paper and held them up as posters. You know, they sometimes do this in ads. Yeah. Anyway, because he wouldn't speak, because he was very worried his family owned theatres in the West End, and so he felt it's very important for him to not be putting them into disrepute. So we're going to talk about Heathcote Williams probably on another programme, and again, another sort of important figure in that time, poet, playwright, writer. You've just come back from Berlin, find that Nicholas is otherwise engaged.
Yeah, I went back to London, and then I decided, before I do my final degree show, I'm going to take a year off from my studies in Berlin, and go traveling with a horse and caravan and do landscape painting in Scotland.
Right.
So I came back to London. Nicholas was in America. When I met him in the street fly posting one evening, and I was staying in a squatted house, completely burnt out, terrible house in Frestonia Road in Notting Hill. He was living at Bit. He had the top floor of Bit, which was basically papers all over the floor, books on the floor, a mattress on the floor, a Gestetner, for printing stuff, and a few clothes, and that was it. That's how he lived. You won't believe it. And so anyway, I lived there with him for a while.
Hold on a second. You bumped into him again on the street.
Yeah.
He was fly posting. You hadn't seen him for a while.
Yeah.
And then you just moved in?
Yeah.
Okay, that was the 70s.
Well,
I guess,
when I just come back, I told him about my plan. He said, well, why didn't you write a paragraph? I put it into the clap thing, and then him and Nicholas Saunders and another friend, Howard from Peace News, they decided how to distribute the money. And they decided to give me some money so I could start this project of, getting a horse. And so I'd say, and also in Berlin I'd worked and saved money, so I had some money. So then I got pregnant. Went to a commune up north in Scotland, Lauriston Hall, and there was a conference of some kind, and so I got pregnant, and we were completely madly in love. We didn't really know each other, Yeah, so I didn't go back to Berlin.
And you didn't get the gypsy caravan and the horse?
Yes, I did. In Shropshire, there was this Heavy Horse Preservation Society, which was just basically one guy living on a completely fallen down buildings, and he had two horses there who couldn't pull a caravan. And one of them, called Patience, is the one I chose, and I felt we needed Patience, I think, for the whole adventure, not just that year. And Nicholas turned a manure car with two wheels. He put a very tall top on it, so he is so tall, so he could stand up inside the cart.
So he came with you?
Yeah, he came with me. We travelled around, and we didn't go to Scotland because it's too far and too hilly, but we went to Wales, and that was the compromise. Nicholas wanted to visit every commune that existed in Wales, and also a friend in Anglesey. And Machunclas is the Alternative Technology Centre. We went there and we stayed there for a week, and we always left the horse somewhere. And when we travelled, we always found a field where we could, park. Then we left the horse for a whole week and went to Barsham Fair in Suffolk, where Nicholas Saunders was selling his books, Alternative London. And lovely, lovely, wonderful. It was totally new to me. It is very much like medieval English life. All the theatre people wandering around is amazing. Can't believe it.
The idealism of it, but also just those kind of lifestyle choices. And
to drop out,
not
have a career and pay a mortgage.
Not worry about the mortgages and You basically got into rural England and that kind of bucolic hippie journey.
I did very little landscape painting because I only could do that in the evening before we went to bed, when the sun was going down. I did some watercolors and sketching, and then it was important how the baby was going to be born and where. I just felt it's a natural part of life. I'm not going into hospital, We found some young people who owned a farm near Newcastle Emlyn in Wales in late October. Because the weather was turning and it was not so much fun to travel around anymore.
What year was this?
75. We stayed on this farm. Their baby had been delivered by a local doctor who came to the house. So I thought, okay. And we had a converted cowshed as a sort of, for the winter, as a cottage. And it was very simple. It had a Rayburn and a bedroom, a bathroom, and a tiny little living room. And Nicholas and I lived there, and he was writing his autobiography. It was very important to him. He loves the family, although he felt they were completely mad. Nicholas actually went mad, sort of, by speaking in tongues. He was a dropout from Oxford. He went to San Francisco and...
So he'd left Oxford University, gone fully west to San Francisco, and then got fully immersed in that kind of the hippie psychedelic experience out there, which transformed him, right?
Yeah, he was a poet really in some ways, but he wanted to change the world, and he was so brilliant in disseminating information and making it into books, which really became bestsellers, like the Poem for the Day book later, or the Natural Death Handbook, or but at the time he was his travel guide. He was the shyest person in the world, right? Very anxious. But he wouldn't. But it's like a lot of English people are put on this front, and you're very well spoken, and you know just what to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's come up quite often here that in the 60s in particular, the kind of scene, the underground scene in London was quite small. It was a small number of people, and it's also come out that quite a few of the sort of what the main players in that scene were from quite posh backgrounds. And in a way, you could be a little bit cynical about that, posh hippies and all that sort of stuff. And there was something else going on, which was that the public school system, the positive aspects of it, from what I understand, is that it inculcated in people a sense of service, public service. That's why quite often people went into government, etc. And so, like Joey Mellon was talking about this, that there was this part of it was like kind of we're the natural rulers of the empire. There's a kind of conceit to it. But there was another thing, which was that actually it's your duty to serve. And I think that even with the counterculture, those kids that had come from that background, they kept some of that with them, didn't they?
Yeah, like Tony Elliott.
Yeah, Tony Elliott, Time Out, and Nicholas, and
Nicholas Saunders.
Nicholas Saunders, and Joey himself, and Amanda Fielding. They had that background. They did actually do something with it, didn't they?
They were all dropouts. They rejected a lot of the stuff that was going on, but they had a sense of power and entitlement in it somehow.
Right. So they rejected their background, but they kept the sense of entitlement and maybe social confidence.
Yeah,
and that whole thing about networking, which is the public school system in the UK still to this day. I can speak from personal experience.
Yes, I see that.
It's not to necessarily that actually you get the best education in the world, but it aims at providing a network of, as it were, minded people, which can prove very socially useful. And you're an outsider, you're a German, you've come to this, so it must be quite weird for you trying to understand it all. What happened next?
We stayed on the farm called Green Hill, and the river Tywey was flowing. We stayed there for the birth, and the doctor came to the house. It was an Indian man. The midwife was an elderly Welsh woman. And we had read Stephen Gaskin's book, Spiritual Midwifery.
Spiritual Midwifery, love it. You've got to love that.
Yeah, he's amazing. And Merlin was born, our son, we called him Merlin, only name I could think of for our son.
You could have called him John or Peter.
No.
Yeah, you're living in deep rural Wales. It's got to be Merlin, isn't it, really?
So we called him Merlin Tywey, like the river. Right. Mark, in case he doesn't like Merlin when he grows older.
Forward thinking, good.
Yeah, it was a fantastic birth. It was like an amazing orgasm, really.
The birth was like an orgasm?
Yeah.
You're going to have to expand on that, Josephine.
I had 2 hush cookies in the evening before, whilst the contractions were sort of coming.
To help with the contractions?
No, just to help with the whole process.
Don't do this at home, kids.
No. To make hot water in the cottage, you had to put the Rayburn on. Right. And that means you can heat water, but you also can cook and bake. And so I used the bath, the hush cookies, it went well together. You bake them whilst you make hot water. And then I had the most amazing experience in the bath. I was sort of completely relaxing, only my nose sticking out of the bath. And it just felt every contraction was like riding, like surfing. Riding a wave, without falling off the surfboard.
Slightly jealous.
Oh, yeah, it was an amazing experience. And Nicholas was really anxious, as he normally. He went to London, he breathing exercises to teach me what to do. And I thought, I just do it.
Yeah.
My body knows
we'll have
what
a hash
to do.
cookie and get in the bath, it'll be fine.
My body knew what to do. I was 24, what could go wrong?
Wow. Okay, right. Well, that's a big countercultural birth event. That's the first. Okay, so now you're a family. I guess at the time, amongst your circle was maybe not that common, was it? I mean,
when I was pregnant, we went to for lunch in the King's Road with Nicholas Saunders before travelling with horse and cart. Told him, and his face dropped. You could see, it's like his playmate's busy now. It's no longer. He was so a bachelor. It's unbelievable. Nicholas.
So you came back to London?
Yeah, and we lived in a squat. We moved into Frestonia Road. People who left that house, they gave us the key so that it wasn't wrecked.
We're going to talk now about Frestonia.
Yeah.
But the context of this is squatting, which is these days seems so alien in London because of the perceived value of property and property rights and stuff. But squatting in the early 70s was very common in London, wasn't it? Because there's so many empty and damaged properties. So tell us your first experience and how it evolved for you.
Well, Nicholas and Hesketh was really big into squatting and helping people with getting them crowbars, telling them which houses. It was like the information of the Rough Tough Cream Puff estate agencies. What was a thing that Hesketh did, and Nicholas was sort of printing all these copies of where you can squat.
Right, it was a guide to how to take a building, wasn't it?
And Nicholas Saunders had actually written the book Alternative London, which showed you even how to wire everything, how to do a whole room house yourself.
Find an empty building, and this is a guide that not only points you at potential empty buildings, but once you get there, you know how to do it in a way that you could then take possession of it without the police subsequently getting you out. And then how to sort of tap into the electrical system and the water system and do all that, set it all up, right? So Hesketh Williams was very instrumental in that.
Oh yeah, the Rough Tough Cream Puff estate agency was flourishing. Was related to BIT also because a lot of people needed somewhere to live, and also Nicholas had written a guide how to live for free in London. Anyway, there was a lot of that, how to get things for free, leftover food and all of those things. So I always lived in squats. There was one squat after another, very beautiful, just off Portobello Road, very beautiful. I mean, a lot of people and big rooms with high windows and high ceilings, very nice. And everybody cared, that things were looked after well, that everybody had everything they needed, where, people helped each other a lot. I mean, these were run-down places that nobody was looking after, but so the squatters looked after the houses, by heating them, by doing them up, making them really beautiful. I mean, there were artists who couldn't afford studios, and here you are.
It was a very environmental way of living, wasn't it? Because you're taking basically a forgotten, neglected resource. Who knows who owned those properties? Maybe the local council, maybe some distant, absent person, and providing homes for people. And then, of course, there were horror stories too, but on the majority was your experience that people were taking care of them and actually creating an environment. And then that evolved into Frestonia, didn't it? This is a sidebar about Frestonia. Frestonia was the name adopted by the residents of Freston Road in West London when they attempted to secede from the United Kingdom in 1977 to form the free and independent Republic of Frestonia. Frestonia consisted of a 1.5 acre triangle of land, including communal gardens, formed by Freston Road, Bramley Road and Shalfleet Drive in W10, where we started. Most of the residents of Freston Road were squatters who moved into empty houses in the early 70s. When the Greater London Council planned to redevelop the area, 120 residents first of all adopted the same surname, Bramley, with the aim of the council rehousing them as one family collectively. But when the council refused to and threatened to evict them at a public meeting attended by over 200 residents, Nicholas Albery, Josefine Speyer and other activists, inspired by the 1949 Ealing comedy film Passport to Pimlico, suggested that they declare independence from the UK. A referendum returned 94% of residents in favour. Independence was declared on 31st of October 1977. Frestonia had its own flag, postage stamps, which were honoured by the post office, passport stamps for visitors, a national newspaper, the Tribal Messenger, as well as an art gallery, a national theatre, and the Frestonian National Film Institute. Its first screening being, appropriately, Passport to Pimlico. There were even plans to introduce a currency and applied to join the United Nations. When the state celebrated its 5th anniversary in 1982, the population numbered 97 people occupying 23 houses. That same year, The Clash recorded their album Combat Rock in Frestonia, and Motorhead, Killing Joke and girls' school also practiced there. The Republic continued to operate as a collective well into the 1980s, becoming a creative hub for writers, artists, musicians, as well as cultural activists. They attracted media interest from all around the globe. Actor David Rappaport was the foreign minister. Playwright Heathcote Williams served as ambassador to the United Kingdom. They eventually set up a housing co-op in negotiation with Notting Hill Housing Trust, and a more conventional local community developed, without any claims to secede from the UK. Some Frestonians were unhappy with the consequent loss of independence and moved away. The remaining Frestonians proved incapable of maintaining the ideals of the nation, which consequently went into decline.
Well, in Preston Road, we had the last house, and the people had already squatted everywhere. There were some really bad houses, and the people in those houses, they were not really creative and motivated, and they were too drugged, or just having a homeless state of mind. But a lot of people, their houses were brilliant. Our neighbour was from New Zealand, who made lutes, the most beautiful lutes, and he played lute music, and his girlfriend, or several girlfriends, actually, a string of them, were from London Contemporary Dance Company, so they were dancers. Or across the road, there are people who'd left university or left South America and became sculptors, jewellery makers, and people had children also, several on their own, but some of them lived as a family in the houses. And also students, I met, for instance, a whole bunch of Austrian and German students who'd come to London to train as a psychotherapist. So that's how I heard about the body psychotherapy.
That was your introduction to that world as well, then, right?
Yeah, but I had already done Freudian analysis because Nicholas and I, we had problems. He's a boarding school boy. What did he ever learn about households and domestic life? Cooking, cleaning, laundry. We were sharing half each. So I was painting, he was writing. I was breastfeeding also for the first year and a half. The others with babies, so we were sharing, looking after the children. So you'd have some free time. And we had a self-organized creche, and we had a communal garden that was very, very beautiful. Grew vegetables. We had a stream.
In London, you had a stream?
In Frestonia, we had
a stream. Frestonia had its own stream.
We didn't have a bathroom in our house. We had to go to a neighbour's house or to the swimming pools to have a bath.
Right.
When we had a coin box in our house, so people who needed phone calls came to our house. So it was, using one another's...
Right, so you had a telephone but no bath.
Yeah.
Other people had a bath.
And we had an outside toilet. And only one cold water sink in the kitchen. That's how people lived there. In the 70s in Notting Hill, because the whole area was supposed to be pulled down to make way for the motorway to the Channel Tunnel.
I think it's difficult to imagine it now, that Notting Hill and North Kensington, which is some of the posher parts of London and really super expensive now.
Yeah.
And gentrified. It's difficult to imagine that what they were like at the time. I lived there myself, North Kensington, for many years. Wonderful houses, so it'd obviously been quite a lovely place in the past, but then it'd fallen into disrepute, hadn't it? And with slum landlords and all sorts of stuff. And so quite a common experience for ordinary people to be living in a house with an outside loo. It wasn't just you hippies. So, and this is the sort of genesis of Frestonia. You created a countercultural community, basically, where you've got a bunch of people living in squats.
Yeah.
Who, lots of artists, writers, social activist types like Nicholas, and living in this kind of communal way, and a sort of countercultural body, really, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot going on, very creative. A lot of children threatened to be... Greater London Council was going to throw us out. Nicholas and I went with Nicholas Saunders to Christiania in Denmark for Christmas.
Christiania in Denmark is this, still there, of course, is this kind of little place in the middle of Copenhagen, which is feels like a sort of separate country, doesn't it? But around the lake, sort of hippie commune right in the middle
people
of the city.
People make their own houses out of glass bottles and concrete, and they had their own bakery, Whole Food Bakery. They had... It was beautiful, and a lot of artisans living there. Yeah, it was very inspiring. And when we came back from there, Nicholas felt the solution for us in Preston Road to avoid eviction was to declare independence in 3 streets: St Anne's Road, Preston Road, and Bramley Road. Can't remember how many people we were, but quite a number of people. We declared independence, and that became... Nicholas is very good with the media. He's a theatre guy, really. And the media came all the time. We had passports. Sumus unu familia. We are all one family. That was our slogan. So you all took the same surname. So we all called Bramley as a surname to be rehoused as one family. We had one pub which was a music center, live music playing often. The People's Hall, still there today, was where we had theatre and a lot of artist studios. And Hesketh Williams had a premiere of one of his plays there.
So you declare independence, you declare yourself a republic, you're basically saying, okay, well, we're not part of the UK anymore, we're outside everything, we've got passports, we've all this sort of stuff. So what was the response of the Greater London Council then?
Well, Horace Cutler was running the Greater London Council. He wrote Nicholas a letter saying, it would have been necessary to invent us if we didn't exist. So he was kind of charmed and thought it was, suppose Nicholas was always charming. He asked the UN peacekeepers to come in case we get attacked by the UK. But we were taking electricity from the UK.
Sure.
And water. There was,
not paying any taxes, I trust.
No, we paid one. Then the Housing Trust took us on. We became officially under there. Then we paid £1 per house as a rent.
Sounds terribly exciting. Sort of slightly humorous as well, right?
Yeah.
And
of course.
but at the same time, a kind of flowering somewhat of the countercultural spirit of the times.
I was the Minister of Culture.
You're the Minister of quite right too, Josefine. I thought I was going to have you done as Minister of Culture or the Minister of the Mind.
Because I was very good in organising big parties,
right,
and big sort of festival type things.
Right.
See, you have to. Oh, and I devised the flag. The flag was like based on the daisy, a yellow centre with white petals. I was doing batik at the time, so I made this national flag. We blocked the street and we partied in the street. And there's so many children and so many musicians and everything, We had Irish drunkard, tree surgeons and God knows anything.
And so Merlin's growing up in Frestonia.
Yeah. So he was 2 years old when we felt the scrapyard down the road and were burning a lot of tyres. And every time when they started a fire in the scrapyard, we had to go to Holland Park. And it was really worrying, the pollution in the area. And then Nicholas took the Ford Motor Company and they won the court case to reduce lead in petrol.
So he got a big effect, didn't he?
Yeah, also we had to have our son's blood tested for lead pollution. And it was not good. And we were anxious to get away from the pollution, really. Then Housing Trust rehoused people in Shepherd's Bush, or people just left because they had money and could afford to buy somewhere. Nicholas and I were off a flat in Maida Vale. It was only I moved in. He stayed in Preston Road to do his writing, to keep the house for that. But also, I was training as a therapist by then.
Right, so you're living apart.
We're living apart,
We're together.
But looking after Merlin together and being together. It got very difficult. There was a very big feminist movement, of course, at the time. For a short while, I was part of a women's theatre group. A lot of lesbians, or maybe all lesbians. I wasn't lesbian. I was thinking, should I be lesbian? Because this is too difficult. The lack of emotional openness that Nicholas and I struggled with.
Are you implying that English men aren't very emotionally open?
Yeah, I was, yeah. You have to remember, in the 70s, it was really sexist.
Well, that's absolutely the case. In many, many ways, the counterculture was so progressive when it came to social changes and stuff. But when it came to the relations between
men
the sexes,
and women,
it was
not good.
Regressive,
not good.
actually.
But I mean, at least there was the pill. So now what's happening in America now with abortion, absolutely awful. There was some freedom for women because I think sex is something to be enjoyed, but I think children is something that you need to care about. Of course, how you care for them, nurture them is very, very important. I just felt the tension between us became too much. We both had affairs, couldn't work it out with each other. The last straw was when Nicholas went on holiday with a girlfriend and they decided he was going to stay with her. And I thought, no, let's get married, be a family and just live together and be done. And he said no. So I broke up. And that was first the relief of the problems that we had, and then such a great pain. I felt it was like a death experience. I had friends who had children where they hated the father of the child. I never did. I always loved Nicholas, but I felt it was unmanageable. For 2.5 years, we were separate.
No, so you guys have split up for 2 years.
Nicholas and I always looked after Merlin, taking it in turns, and I was working at Neil's Yard and then training at the therapy centre in Acton. And when I qualified there, I started working in the therapy rooms in Neil's Yard, having a room there. We went in London for Merlin's birthday treat. We went to see Back to the Future. And when I saw the film, I thought we could be back together again. We don't have to, just because you broke up, oh, you left me because you went with a girlfriend now. So I thought we could get back together again. And Nicholas thought, maybe one day a week.
Very countercultural.
I could stay at his house. Sort of got into doing that. But I found it very painful. But then my dad came over to visit me. I didn't get on with him at all. But that visit in London, something had happened to my dad. He was so warm, so caring, and so non-judgmental. And he went to see my sister, who also lived in the squat in Frestonia Road, where Nicholas was still living. And my sister was still asleep, so he went, knocked at Nicholas's house and saw him and had a conversation with Nicholas and said to Nicholas, how come you can save the world, but you can't save your own family? And that made Nicholas think again. So then we decided to get back together. We decided to buy a house. So Merlin was 15 when Nicholas and I got back together again, when we bought the house where I still live now in Cricklewood. I felt like shut the door and then never look back. I can't remember Maida Vale. Can't remember Notting Hill.
This is it.
Water under the bridge. I can't even, it was just...
So you've just embraced conventionality.
When you live in a squat, you always have furniture given from some here and there. And we had all that furniture. We had not bought any furniture. Only my bed. There was a luxury. Nicholas thought it's a total luxury if you spend anything on other than books. Once when I was pregnant, I said to him, I want to buy, has he got some money? Can he give me some money to help me buy some boots? And he thought I was going to buy books. When he heard the £100 were on boots, he thought, oh my God, it's terrible. So we had, the furniture we had in our house came from the Cambodian embassy, where we had friends in St. John's Wood in the Cambodian embassy, which was a real cultural centre.
Which was occupied, of course, wasn't it?
Yeah, by our friends, squatted.
We've got you guys back together, and Merlin's happy. So it's happy family time. Still living a kind of countercultural life, somewhat. What happens next then?
His father was dying in Monaco, and he was diagnosed with cancer, and his wife is Japanese and wouldn't talk about dying to him. Whilst we were broken up, I had one whole day when I was running a group on death and dying, because we each had to facilitate a group on a subject we were not very familiar with, and I was just discovering, all that literature on death and dying. The breakup with Nicholas was like an experience of death, and I felt that death was the other side of birth. The contractions come often, and they come lesser and lesser, and then there is a new life. I just felt that death was like birth, a natural process that you can prepare for and talk about before anybody's ill and dying, and that's the best time. And that now that his father was dying and we couldn't really talk to him and didn't know how to talk to him, that was so distressing. Nicholas, he had this motto: anytime you have a problem, solve it in such a way that you solve it and help other people at the same time. So the thing to do, we wanted to be educated about death. We weren't experts. We should set up a forum, a place where people can come and talk about death and be educated, and from all different aspects, So we thought, yes, let's do that. And we set up the Natural Death Centre. Nicholas knew Gulbenkian Foundation. They gave us £3,000 to start this project. And Nicholas was very good with the media, because this was before the internet. This was 1991. And it immediately took off with a very big article by Joanna Moorhead in The Observer. It was like 3/4 of a page with photographs of us and stuff. Eating ice cream and talking about death in our living room with her. And So we had the public came to us all the time. They gave the address, so people wrote to us. They gave us ideas. They gave us information. It took over all the other projects that Nicholas was running.
You
in the
know,
office.
you've been rather modest about your involvement in it, and Natural Death Centre, Natural Death Handbook, and you know, it's sprouted into Good Death Movement, all sorts of things now.
Yeah.
It's like we were in a country where to talk about this stuff was taboo. But also, it was shrouded in mystery, deliberately, often by, say, the undertaking industry, wasn't it? You know, because it was an economy of its own.
Yeah.
People didn't know what happened. You know, they didn't know what their options were, what they could do. And, you know, they were forced into, particularly in the grieving, they were forced into, by business people, into doing things in a certain way. And you guys basically opened the whole thing up. You blew it all wide open.
Yeah.
And it's, even though lots of those things are still stuck in the past, it has changed things massively. I know myself, because obviously, you know, I curate London Month of the Dead, and, you know, we also run lots of things around death. And you guys were instrumental in this country in that massive, I would say, massive countercultural change. You know, one of the most important things I think you did, something which has gone from being countercultural to being cultural, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people say things but don't do anything about it. And I think I'm one of the people who says a lot of things and doesn't do a lot of things about it. But Nicholas did things about it. And so it was one of the charities. He never thought that it would take over our lives, you know. We became experts not in how to die at home, which is what we thought, midwives for the dying. We also run another project, Midwives for the Dying, called Befriending Network, where I could develop a whole educational pack for the volunteers to take them through so that they'd be able to support people who are dying at home. But what really took off was the funeral side. And people wanted to organize funeral themselves. We were not the only ones who thought this way, but we didn't have anyone to bury. I mean, people came to us and provided us information, and that really made the whole difference. But also that the media spread the information for us, and the public wanted information. You know, you have to remember there was the AIDS movement. They had Terence Higgins Trust. It wasn't anymore. The dying people are old.
Young, healthy, beautiful people were dying. Right? Yeah. And that brought about change. And of course, then you published the National Death Handbook, which becomes a kind of guide to the I would say the counterculture of dying, about different ways that you could do it, right?
And you can buy the Natural Death Handbook on Amazon. Old copies, I think, is just as good, because it gives you the idea what you can do. Because Nicholas put all the letters that people wrote to us, all the information. He was so many people telling you about giving you ideas. You know, and so
we're going to put links to all that part of your work in the
great.
show notes too, of course. Let's move on a little bit, because of course
Nicholas died.
Yeah, we have to talk about that.
Nicholas and I married in 1991, just a month after we started the Natural Death Centre, and our son was 15. And Nicholas Saunders gave us some land as a wedding present. It was surrounded by Natural Trust land, and it is still so stunning. 98, Nicholas Saunders died in a car accident, doing research for a book with his partner, and the book was called In Search of the Ultimate High. He was about to go to meet people who use ibogaine and talk with them about it, and tried himself and to write for the book about it. And the car came off the road. He was a passenger. He died of a broken neck, and that was terrible. His wife Anya is a good friend. She had been pregnant and had a miscarriage just 2 months before then, and now he's dead. He was 60. And we organized the funeral on our land, and he's buried on our land. And it was really showing people how people can create something that is deeply meaningful and very powerful and beautiful. And it doesn't involve any funeral directors. And it doesn't involve, I mean, everybody was involved, all of us. We were totally capable, you know, physically able. And we came together as a community and created this funeral. And knowing what to do was so empowering. It helped us so much in this terrible time. And then 3 years later, Nicholas dies in a car accident, also of a broken neck. He'd gone to see his mum for tea, and then took the train home, and she said, I'll give you a lift to the station. Somebody crashed into them, and he died. The car spun round, and he had a broken neck, died of a broken neck. and he's buried on our land. And we had many times our honeymoon we had on our land with a whole lot of people staying for 3 days. And, this is a land which we're very happy, had many happy memories. Yeah, my son went there when he got married, had the wedding ceremony on the land with everybody camping for several days.
Nicholas died
in June 2001. And it was, and knowing what to do helped so much. So much.
We're getting to the end. I mean, and it wasn't the end for you, of course. In the 20-odd years since you've carried on, you're a practicing psychotherapist. You've also stayed, involved with the Death Cafe movement, which started in 2010 with John Underwood. You're very involved with that, which has spread. I see it also coming out of those kind of countercultural years too. If you sort of look back on all that time, Josefine, how does it feel?
I think I feel so grateful for everything. It was hard, I wouldn't lie. It was also mad, but it was so intense and so amazing. People often say you should write a book, but my God, I can't be bothered because I'm too busy living now. I'm going back to art as well. I'm painting. I have a little studio at home. I have a lot of artists around me, especially in the pandemic. It was really good to hang out together, go for walks, and I feel death education for psychotherapists is really where it's at, and also looking more creatively at aging. So that's my projects now. Running groups on talking about death for psychotherapists, as well as my private practice.
Thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you.
So thanks very much to Josefine. I'm going to put show notes to link to her work for you. You can check that out. And check out the Natural Death Centre and Death Cafe, of course, too. Thanks for listening. You can come and join us, bureauoflostculture.com. You can write to us, suggest themes or guests for the show. Now we're going to finish with a track from our sponsor, The Real Tuesday World, tuesdayweld.com. This is from their upcoming album, Dreams. It's called Bone, Dreams, Blood. You're still in love with Susan